Good morning, everyone. My name is Zenobia Harris. I am the CEO for the Kent Chamber of Commerce. I'd like to welcome you to our series of conversations. This is COVID-19, a conversation, updates from real estate professionals. So just want to let you know who is sponsoring this event today. Thank you to South King Media, who is our media sponsor. They are the owners of I Love Kent, along with 8 other news outlets. So thank you so much to South King Media, specifically I Love Kent. Today, our conversation, we have guest speakers. We have Rosie Rourke with John L. Scott Team. We have Cindy Cameron with Fairway Independent Mortgage. We have Caitlin Jackson with Dimension Law Group and Vicki Gaskill with Bell Anderson and Associates. Today is just a conversation from professionals. You are able to ask questions either through the chat form here on Zoom or on our Facebook page, and we will make time at the end to have those questions answered. Today, we're going to talk about real estate as it relates to residential, commercial, and property management. So we will start today with Rosie. Rosie, it's on you.
Good morning. So I understand that what you'd like for me to talk about is COVID in particular and how it's affecting real estate. I know that we're having an audience. I can see a few names of people I recognize that are real estate agents, so they're already familiar with some of the COVID protocol. But we have definitely been able to continue with real estate. It's as strong as ever. The first 2 weeks that we got notice that we were not essential. I've always thought I was essential, but if we're not essential for the first 2 weeks, we could not go inside houses, outside. We couldn't show, we couldn't do anything. We couldn't meet with clients, couldn't meet a photographer. We were basically shut down for 2 weeks. During that time, up until that time, the market was so extremely strong. Our market economy was great. We had low interest rates. Everything was driving our market. We were entering this typical spring height of the season market for real estate. During that time, I was able to sell 2 houses without them even seeing inside because we have the virtual tools that we were able to enact. So that tells you how strong the market has been and continues to be. It doesn't matter if there's a pandemic going on. People need to buy and people need to sell. And it's a constant. And with the interest rates so low, we have been able to keep driving that market forward, like I said. Fast forward, the 2 weeks are over. We can finally go show houses, but we have very strict protocol from the MLS. We're all embracing that and happy to have it so we can keep our clients safe, both the sellers and the buyers, and ourselves safe. So we walk in with our COVID protocol of masks and sanitizing stations and one person in at a time with the agent. So if you've got a group of a family of 5, 4 of them need to stay outside while one goes in with you, and then we take turns. Pre-approved buyers only, no open houses. Even with these limitations, our market is stronger than ever. I'm looking at market statistics, and for Southeast King County, which is where our lovely Kent location is, we have had just a surge of activity. No inventory hardly at all. The sales have been up. The pending sales have outbid the inventory. So if you're priced under $500,000, there's hardly anything out there, and we're experiencing bidding wars. And having the virtual tools to help sell these houses to the clients, we are still able to acquire those bidding war multiple bid situations. So I found it interesting that our Southeast King County market has actually outshined Seattle, Bellevue markets. And I believe it's because, and some of my peers I'm hoping can enter into the chat group and tell me what you think, but I feel like it's because we are still driven by an industry where it's tech, Amazon, Google, Facebook. We have these great industries here in our area, and they can work virtually. They haven't been laid off, and they're driving our market. Our interest rates, one of our clients yesterday locked in at 2.75% interest rate. That's amazing. But they're hovering at an average of about 3.07%. And Cindy, you can probably weigh in on interest rates better than I can from Fairway Mortgage. But we have an affordable place to live here in Southeast King County. We have great schools, so we have been very resilient, even nationwide, taking our little Southeast King County corner of the world, put it up against the nation's statistics. We are a hot commodity. So in my opinion, our real estate is still going very strong. We have the virtual tools to be able to pivot and sell in that fashion versus the old-fashioned ways. And quite frankly, I'm hoping some of those tools are going to stick around because they've made it more streamlined. We no longer have the open houses where just the general public comes through, and at times we had to be very concerned about any theft or vandalism of people coming into houses that have no business coming into houses. Now they're all regulated by the MLS of appointments only and pre-approved only. So no more looky-loos and maybe I'll buy, maybe I won't, but what do you have in your jewelry cabinet? So I'm hoping that will stick around for a while, and I think they will. And we're having to do virtual open houses with, having our 3D Matterport virtual tour, which brings the house into your living room. So they do drive-bys, they see the virtual tour, they see the still shots, and then they say, yes, I want to see the house. That actually streamlines our process as a real estate agent, and they have to be pre-approved, so there's no question about, are they worthy of being able to afford this house? Am I wasting my time showing a house that they can't afford? So I don't know if anybody has any questions, or if you want me to talk further about any other direction of real estate.
All right, so there's a question in a chat that someone said, I thought the rules were updated to allow 2 people and an agent in a house at any time. Is that the new rule?
That is the new rule, hot off the market, I think yesterday from Governor Inslee. Now that we are 1.5, the 1.5 allows a second person who can go in. So we're a real estate agent and 2 people can go in at one time.
We had some questions on, and I think you answered it, but is now a good time to sell your house? Because they don't want to sell too soon, but they don't want to hold on it too long. Can you speak to that at all?
Yes, I feel like right now is the optimum time. And I've been in real estate for 25 years, and I've seen the patterns of how the behaviors of people of when they buy and sell. Typically, our spring market is the very best time to buy and sell. And this is no different. It's just our spring market kind of got shoved a little bit longer because of this situation with COVID. So we're deep into our spring market. It's the election year. No matter what is happening around the world with election year, pandemic or not, recession or not, it doesn't matter what's happening. It always pauses. So just before the election year month, everything comes to a halt, in my opinion. That's what I've experienced. And everyone waits, and they want to see what's going to happen with the new regime. Same regime, new regime, stock market, bullish, what's going to happen. Then after the election is over and people start to get in their groove, it starts to wake up again. But then at that point, we are now into our fall season, and fall is usually my second best season for sales, but I'm wondering how it's going to happen. I don't have a crystal ball, but I'm thinking it might be a little slower. And then winter months always dies down no matter what's happening. And then it wakes back up in the mid-January. So I think we're still going to see a pause like we always do for election, but I really feel like COVID was a wake-up call to a lot of people saying, it doesn't matter what's happening. This is really good real estate. I'm in a great area. I need to buy. I need to sell. The interest rates are amazingly low. I still have my job. Everything's okay. I'm going to go ahead and buy. So I think we still have such a glutton of, that seller's market where we have a glutton of buyers and not enough inventory. Until that balances out, this is a really good time to buy and sell.
Okay. Are there any additional I guess, task or responsibilities for folks that want to sell their home because of COVID-19 and the changes? Do you see that it's going to be more work for them to sell their home now?
It is more work for them to sell their house right now. And it's
Okay.
more work for the agents to show the house right now. So what we prep our clients to do when they're on the market is I actually tell them, can we try to batch most of the showings from Thursday to Monday? And Mr. and Mrs. Seller, maybe you want to go into a VRBO or stay with a family member during that weekend, because if they don't, it's going to be a revolving door of showings, and there's nowhere really for them to go. Some of the businesses with 1.5, they're starting to open up, but before you could just sit at Starbucks or go down to the Red Robin and have lunch or go visit your friends, and we don't have that luxury at this point. I think it's going to open up and get a little better now, but still there's limited places where they can go hang out while there's a showing. And when we first started with COVID rules, I felt so bad because my seller was elderly and she stayed in her car with her dog for 6 hours while the house was being shown like a revolving door because there's a lack of inventory. So I'm advising them to maybe set up something that would be fun for them to do, and they won't be in their home, because when they come back home after a showing, they're sanitizing everything, doorknobs. So we're trying to mitigate the touching of everything. So we ask that the client have the lights on, doors open, so they don't have to open doors to closets and bathrooms. And when they come back home at the end of the night, then turn off the lights and they can do what they want, but sanitize everything. We can't leave our business cards inside the house any longer. We can't leave flyers inside the house any longer because that's another touch point. We set up our little sanitation station and require everyone that comes in to wear the mask and to wash their hands or sanitize their hands, and hopefully sanitize behind them and not touch as many things as possible.
Awesome. Okay, thank you so much for sharing that. If you could do me a favor, I'm sure everyone can find you on Facebook or LinkedIn, but in the chat, because I will share this, go ahead and drop your contact information, and we will get that out to the folks, again, that are on Facebook and here at this meeting. So again, Rosie, thank you so much, and I'm sure you're going to hold on the line just in case folks have information, or I'm sorry, I have questions. There's a question about commercial real estate on the commercial real estate market, and we will have that coming up here just shortly. So our next speaker is it Cindy? Is that the right order? Oh, Vicki, yay, okay, awesome. So now we're gonna pass it over to Vicki Gaskill with Bell Anderson.
That was according to your agenda. First of all, let me introduce myself. I'm with Bell Anderson Associates. It's a company that's been in business for 57 years, started by Don Bell and Jerry Anderson, old-time Kent individuals. In fact, I think Bell Anderson's one of the oldest members of the chamber. We've been around, that long, since 1963. I've actually been with the company since '86. Came as a bookkeeper and eventually bought the company in 2002. Our primary focus is single-family rental properties. We do some small multifamily, and then we have a whole nother other division that manages community associations. That's condos and HOAs, and I'll kind of talk about that, a little bit later in our discussion. COVID-19, certainly, just as Rosie had talked about, has had a tremendous impact on residential rental properties. However, there is good news. It's not, we are not as impacted as I thought we would be on the collection of rents. And I'd like to share with you a little bit of statistics that I gathered, not only from Bell Anderson, but also from a national trade association that represents the single family environment, the National Association of Residential Property Managers. It's called NARPM. First of all, Bill Anderson, we probably have about 340 to 350 residential units, and primarily they're single family rental homes. And let's see, in the last couple months, I'm looking for my stats here. We probably have had about 10% of our residents that might have had some kind of issue with paying their rent because of lost jobs, or who knows, what the reasons are. 10% of 350 men, to me, that's not bad at all. I wrote down here 6% were on payment plans, and only 3% of all those residents we have had absolutely no contact with whatsoever. They don't answer their phone. As it is now, we can't even send them any messages or notices or anything like that. 1%, less than 1% of our, we don't see June being much different. That was a surprise. That was a surprise to me. But NARPM, they also are surveying their members. And here again, like I said, that's a trade association that pretty much has managers that oversee single family rental housing. They have over 6,000 members. And they did they've done a survey. In fact, they're into their third survey for June. They did one in April and May with approximately 1,000 members responding. And nationally, they're still seeing 81 to 100% of the residents, the tenants, are paying the rent. They're not. In fact, the figures are going. I think it's 62% of them are 93 to 90 to 100% of the renters are paying. By the 15th of the month, I had written down here only 10% of the residents hadn't paid. So I don't know if you guys see that. It is quite a surprise. It was to me. I will tell you that of the investors that are part of that mass group, most of them have 5 units or less, and the rest of the members or the owners of these single family rental properties they just own one property. So you can see how that would be very impactful on their situation if they had a renter, that wasn't paying their rent in a timely manner. I also own a company down in Tacoma that has approximately 280 residential units. Here again, primarily single family. And today I received a report from my managing broker down there that they only have 4% of the tenants that are having some kind of payment issues, rent payment issues. They have 5 tenants out of the whole group that are on payment plans, and only 6 that haven't paid anything in the last 2 months. Here again, I can't be more excited. It's pretty good news. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail on some of the the last Proclamation 2019.2 and the National Federal CARES Act issues on eviction moratoriums, because it sounds to me like Caitlin's going to go over some of that for you. But I will tell you, there's numerous things that are happening out in the rental environment right now, and it's not just COVID-19. It's a lot of the change of the state statutes and local statutes and stuff like that that are really impacting the rental industry right now. And what Rosie said, I'm finding more than ever. In fact, this month we have 6 units that have gone on the market for sale. Our owners are, a lot of them are choosing to get out of the rental market, mostly jurisdictional statute issues, not necessarily the COVID-19 situation. Looking at my notes here, and what it's doing, it's taking away a lot of our inventory, because where we used to see this time of year, we probably would have 15 to 20 properties on the market for release. And right now we're doing really good if we have 1 to 3. The company I have down in Tacoma, last month they had 3 available, small little apartment units, not very big size. We had over 100 inquiries on those 3 units. People are so desperate to find rental housing. And across the board, my buddies that I talk to in the industry in the King County and Pierce County areas are really struggling to find the inventory for the people that are looking. That's going to be a challenge. I did mention at the very beginning that I also manage community associations, or our company does. In fact, we have over 5,000 units that are in some form of a community association, be they a condo or an HOA. Overall, not a serious delinquency issue of people not paying their maintenance dues or their assessments. But what we are seeing, and it's just what Rosie was saying, we're seeing a tremendous amount of turnover of real estate. We're responsible at Bell Anderson to provide some turnover documents at closing, and we're seeing the last 2 months, the gal I have, the AR person I have in my office that's handling that, has handled more than we've ever handled, in the 30 some odd years I've been around. So they're selling the properties. It's just that the rental situation is just a little more challenging because we just don't have enough around there for those that want them. And I think that's about it. Any questions on residential rentals, especially the small family, single family?
Yeah, so I would say, do you know, as far as you were talking about some of the impacts and statutes that are causing folks to sell and get out of the rental business, can you talk briefly about what some of those are, or if you have a resource for folks to look at things that are changing if you are a owner who is currently in the rental market?
Caitlin, let me know if I'm stepping on your toes. So I'll just tell you, and if anyone's handy and wants to write them down, or I can put them in the chat, I can give you 4 House bills that are coming online June 11th. Senate Bill 5165, which is going to, does not allow landlords to require Social Security numbers on the rental applications. We can still, put it on our application, whether or not they fill it out. And this is significant in the sense that it helps the landlord to run credit reports. Although there are other ways, that we can get income verification and credit report information. House Bill 2535 is now going to require a 5-day grace period before charging late fees, which means if your rents are due on the 1st, you cannot start charging any late fees until the 7th of the month. We've always started on the 6th, but now we're postponed. It also has some requirements in it for those that might be in government funding, such as Section 8 vouchers, giving them the opportunity to ask in writing their landlord for a change of due date within 5 days of what the normal due date is. So example would be, if your rent's due on the 1st, somebody who's receiving government funding to help with their rent may be able to put in writing, I'd like my rent to be due on the 5th, and you would have to comply with that, which was also going to extend out pay or vacate notice for them too. House Bill 1694 allows tenants to make payments on their move-in fees and deposits. What that says that if you have a month-to-month or a 3-month or less rental agreement, a tenant can make 2 equal payments on move-in fees and deposits. If you have a lease agreement that's more than 3 months, a tenant can make 3 equal payments on their deposits and move-in fees. It also is limited the holding fee, which a holding fee is the monies we take down to take a property off the market for rent until all the paperwork's done and they actually move in. And we've, in the past, have always taken the first full month's rent as a holding fee. Now that particular House Bill 1694 only allows for 25% of a full month's rent. And then the last one is Senate Bill 6378. It's a new notice that has been developed for the pay or vacate if somebody hasn't paid their rent, and you give them a pay or vacate notice, which eventually leads to a possibly an unlawful detainer action. It's basically tenants' rights information and contact information is to be on those forms in the future. So those are the 4 main ones. And then, like I said, what's affecting the COVID-19 or the Governor's Proclamation 20-19.2 and the Federal CARES Act program. Does that help to explain a little bit of what I was talking about? Did I lose everybody?
Yes, it does. Thank you. Nope, I think they're still on.
Okay.
Perfect. So are you okay, Vicki?
Yeah, I'm just trying to read what the chat was in case it was something that pertained to me, but I don't think so.
Yeah, and I was going to ask Bill Ellis, we can go over that if you're still going to be on the line when we go through questions. So Vicki, I definitely appreciate your insight and the information. I am actually happy to hear. I thought that the numbers would be completely different, honestly, as it relates to folks not paying. So that's really good news in a time that I don't think we get a lot of that. So thank you so much for sharing that. I think it is a testament to some of the things that are happening within the community, maybe some of the support that is coming from some of the nonprofit groups and things like that. So thank you for sharing. Again, Vicki, share your contact information or any website that you would like for us to share with our participants or chamber members. Not that we want to add to 100 more people applying for 4 locations to rent, but give us that information and we'll be sure to share that out. So I appreciate you. So next up, we're going to talk about the mortgage industry, and we have the chamber president, Cindy Cameron, who is with Fairway Independent Mortgage. And so Cindy, go ahead and take it away.
All right, thanks, Zenobia. I appreciate your inviting me to be a part of the panel. Just a little bit about me and Fairway. I've been in the industry for well over 20 years, so I've seen a lot of changes in our industry, up and down. Fairway also has been in the business a long time. I'm right here in our Kent office, so right here in our market. One of the things that's really interesting for me is that some of our loan officers are having our best years ever in production. So that shows you that the market is still very strong. And as Rosie indicated, rates are very, very low right now. So I'm highly encouraging people to get out there and buy houses if they're interested, and call us about refinances because rates are definitely looking good. Probably COVID, in my experience, the biggest thing that came out of it right away was the concern of forbearance and how that would have an effect on just the market in general for lenders. Not only big banks, but lenders such as myself, where we're a mortgage bank. So all we do is finance homes. We don't do anything commercial. We don't do car loans or checkings and savings. So, excuse me. So forbearance was a big concern right out of the gate. And basically what forbearance is that there was the laws like Vicki was referring to where, you know, they couldn't collect your rent. And the same thing was happening for mortgages where a person could basically just say, you know, I need to take the next 12 months off of my mortgage payment. They would call their lender. It was very easy for them to do. They didn't have to prove anything. And that could have a huge effect on our market and our mortgage rates and basically the industry in general. So in response to that, Fannie Mae and other investors tightened up their lending requirements. One of the first things they did is that they would not allow anybody who had entered into forbearance to finance anything for the next 12 months after they had finished their forbearance. So even if somebody had been making their payments, so say for example, I entered into forbearance and like I said, the lenders were making it very easy to enter into forbearance because they needed to. And if I entered into forbearance, but I still made my payments, Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae were saying I was ineligible to finance anything for 12 months. So even though I had a perfect payment history and I entered into forbearance, I was being penalized with not being able to finance. That since has changed. So there's been a lot of changes in our market almost every single day in regards to credit risk and financing. Right out of the gate when this happened, as a result of the fear of forbearance, they took away all jumbo financing and they took away bond loan financing. So a lot of the people who have low to middle income and look to do a zero down program had that taken away from them by some lenders because of the forbearance fear. That has since come back with many lenders. Some lenders are doing what we call an overlay, which means there are certain requirements that the investor requires, but then the lender adds on an extra layer of protection, if you will, for the lender. But what that says to me, these things are loosening up. Credit score requirements are also loosening up again. Right after COVID, we saw everything get much stricter. Credit score requirements were a lot higher, especially for cash out, jumbo, that kind of thing. So the nice thing is I do think we're starting to settle back into kind of a new normal. Underwriters are still looking at files really carefully. They're the what we call QM market, which is maybe the market where you didn't have to provide pay stubs or bank statements. That market has taken a big hit and had kind of started to reemerge, and since then has kind of not been around as much. So that definitely, I think, is going to take a little bit more time to come back. I do see it coming back, but I think it is going to take more time. Another thing that's changed a lot is we're not meeting in person as much anymore for applications. So we're having to find a new way to meet with our referral partners, with our agents, with our clients. You know, we're starting to use Zoom a lot more, which for some of us old goats like myself, that's taken some getting used to. But, you know, it's if we can't change and adapt, then it's, you know, we need to be able to do that. And I think COVID has really showed me that I have to learn the new tricks. And so we're taking a lot of applications over Zoom. We're doing, we were doing this before, but maybe it's much more common now for somebody to actually do their loan application on their phone. And with the younger generation, that's really popular. They can upload everything on their phone, so they literally don't even have to be able to go into their office to do things. So that kind of thing is definitely becoming much more popular. And then, you know, rates like you guys referred to, they're just phenomenally low. And they're down in the low threes, depending on the products and the credit scores, but it's definitely a very busy time for us over here. So I think that's it. I went kind of fast, I think.
Yeah, you did. Related to some of the changes, and let's talk specifically credit score, because I noticed something before. Credit score used to be the high was 800. Now I got something that said it's 900. Has the credit, I'm gonna try to ask, your credit score, obviously it's tied to the interest rate that you get. Has that number shifted? So let's say if you could get a 3% and you had 800, do you now need 825 to get 3%, or is
Right.
that, okay.
Yeah, so it did change a lot at the very beginning. And so I have not heard of a credit score of 900. Probably the best credit scores I've seen are like in the mid 8s, 825. I don't know that I've even seen an 850, but maybe. But 900 I've never heard of. So, you know, the credit requirements at first were you had to have at least a 720 to get the best rates. And that has kind of tapered down a little bit. So, you know, you still need to have over a 720, 740 to get the best of the best, but at least you can do a loan application, where for a while there, you couldn't even do a loan application if you didn't have those credit scores. For a while, we were going down to a credit score of 580. And now we are requiring at least a 620 to do anything. So FHA, conventional, all of the regular lenders, or excuse me, investors are allowing us to go with the 620, and we don't currently have any extra rules on top of that like we did for a little while by Fairway. Fairway itself is definitely what we call a paper. So most of the products that we do are not what we call subprime. So 620 is actually, you know, that's a pretty wide range that we will allow people to do. So it's nice that it's gone back down to that, because it wasn't there for a while.
Awesome. Do you have any tips for anyone who is looking to purchase a home as it relates to their credit, or is that something you guys do on a case-by-case basis and they can reach out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always happy to review credit with somebody, and there are some instances where we can improve their credit score immediately. And there are some instances where we can work with them for 3 to 6 months, a year, you know, whatever it takes. I'm always happy to meet with people, review their credit report, and let them know, you know, what they need to do to get those credit scores up and improve the rates. But the nice thing is now that somebody who does have the lower credit score does have the option to buy. Refinances are still going to require the higher credit scores. Mortgage insurance, which is something I didn't talk about, that also, when COVID hit, mortgage insurance is for if you don't put 20% down, and mortgage insurance is required by investors, and they also base their rates dependent on credit score. So they did increase the rates a little bit along with their credit score requirements. So that's one thing that has not loosened back up as much. But hopefully we'll see a little bit of that loosening as well. So any other? I don't see any questions.
So,
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cindy. Please do the same. I appreciate your time today. In the chat box, drop your information, and I'll share that to this group as well as our Facebook group. So last but not least, before we go into some of the questions that I've received, we have Caitlin Jackson with Dimensions Law. Caitlin?
Hi there. Hopefully you can hear me. Can you confirm? Okay, good, because I had some problems with my stuff earlier. Okay, great. All right, so my name is Caitlin Jackson. First and foremost, I'm an attorney. I practice real estate law along with some other areas, but real estate is my main practice right now, especially given the current COVID-19 situation in our world right now, because that is one thing that is affecting, I think, real estate significantly. And so it's drawn my attention, at least for now. I'm also, not only am I an attorney, I'm also a landlord. So I own rental property. And so this is something that I'm obviously very passionate about, both from a professional standpoint and a personal standpoint. I have 15 minutes to tell you guys about all of the I would like to think all of the current laws and legal challenges and changes that have been enacted as a result of COVID. However, I spent 2 hours on this topic recently, and I still found myself rushing through it. So what I'm about to provide is a very, very broad brush. And I think I need to put an asterisk by any of the information provided to you today, because what I'm finding is that these laws, rules, and ordinances are changing daily, with or without notice a lot of times. So I'm going to do my very best. But once again, I think that if you are a landlord or you are somebody that needs to do anything in result, like regarding a tenancy, I hope you have, somebody, hopefully an attorney, but if not, somebody very experienced in this area that is well up to date on the day-to-day changes in your local, state, and federal laws. So first, broad brush is the 3 areas that are impacted right now are federal legislation, state legislation, and even your local city ordinances. From a federal legislative standpoint, thankfully, we've pretty much just had one broad brush legislative act called the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Securities Act, or CARES Act for short, which the federal government enacted March 27th of this year. Now that is, I think, a 400-page document, which I don't want to go over today or ever in my life. But the part that is most relevant to the conversation today would have to do with the eviction moratorium that was put in place for 120 days unless extended, effective March 27th. So it's expected right now, as far as I'm aware, that 120 days expires around August 1st. And I'm going to get to other issues with regard to August 1st from a state level, but that's pretty much where we're at for the time being. But it only applies to properties that are considered a covered property. And that's going to be a discussion if you have to take any action with regard to your property that you really should talk to somebody about, because what is considered a covered property is really sort of a dense definition, and it really just has to do with whether or not there's any federal attachment to your property or federal security on your property in certain circumstances. So if it's a Fannie Mae, if you've got a loan or you've got a lien or you've got a mortgage that is Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, it's probably going to be considered a covered property. But I could get into the exceptions list on that, but that's going to bring us well over time if I go down that rabbit hole. But what you really need to understand is that basically if you have a covered property, the CARES Act is going to cover you. Some of my clients own their properties outright, and thankfully in those situations, you would not be considered a covered property, because if you own it outright, it's yours and you don't have any liens against it, so you don't have to deal with that. Okay, so from a state level, we have, we started with proclamation, I think it was proclamation 20-19, which was our initial eviction moratorium that was put in place. but at a state level. However, it developed to 20-19.1, and then very recently we got to 20-19.2. What 20-19.2 does is essentially continues with the general rule that there are no evictions allowed in Washington State if the basis of that eviction is non-payment of rent. However, 20-19.1 started with a very broad brush that you could not serve even any sort of notice on the property, whether it be a 3-day, which is for waste, nuisance, and criminal activity, a 10-day if there's a violation of the lease agreement and some sort of term that they were required to follow. A good example of that would be if you had a no pet rule and you discovered they had pets, or a 20-day notice to terminate, or any notice to terminate whatsoever, unless as part of that notice you were attaching an affidavit that specified with very clear facts that you were moving forward because that person posed an immediate and significant risk to the health and safety of others. So in essence, what it ended up doing was that you couldn't move forward with any sort of notice at all unless it was a 3-day, because the 3-day is for waste, nuisance, and criminal activity, or lack of permission. But the only time that somebody would pose a significant and immediate risk to the health and safety of another would be through a 3-day. It couldn't really be done through a 10-day, and you certainly couldn't terminate your tenancy. And so the long and the short of it is that you were basically going to have to continue with the occupants of the residence unless you could find some reason under that exception. What 19.2 has done is release that a little bit. So 19.2 or 20-19.2 has allowed landlords to move forward with an action so they could serve a notice, or they could continue an eviction that had already started before, the restriction came into play, or they could ask the sheriff's office to continue to enforce an eviction that had already been ordered. Because some of you may understand that once an eviction starts, you have like a judicial process. It goes through the court system, and then there's a writ of restitution that's ordered, and the writ is delivered to the sheriff's office, and it's up to the sheriff's office to timely execute that writ. So different clients of mine, when the moratoriums came into play, were at different phases of that process. Either they'd served a notice and were waiting for that notice to expire, or they'd actually served a lawsuit, and that because that notice had expired, and either the tenant or the occupant had answered or had not answered, but the lawsuit was pending, or even in some cases, I had cases where the court had already ordered the eviction, the writs were in the hands of the sheriff for 10 days, and then the eviction moratorium came into play, and even then they had to stop. So some of my clients' writs have been on hold with the sheriff's office since essentially the beginning of March of this year, and they've been unable to move forward. So in that context, 20-19.2 allows landlords or owners a little bit of wiggle room to move forward based on where that eviction is and why you're doing it. So some of the exceptions here now are if the person is a threat to not just the immediate health and safety of another person, but they've also added property into that. And I think that's a response to the fact that the first moratorium, statewide moratorium, 20-19.1, did not really address or seem to care about whether or not the occupant was a threat to the property itself, so doing damage to the property. Now the current the 19.2 does address the fact that somebody could be removed based on damage to the property or a threat to the property. The other exception to that rule right now is that if you want to serve a notice, the landlord and the reason for that is the landlord wants to personally occupy the premises as a primary residence or sell the property. So if you want to terminate a tenancy, you can do that now, but you have to basically provide written notice that your intent is to, or that the landlord's intent is to personally occupy it or sell it, and you have to give 60 days notice. that's the first bullet point. But that's any type of notice you want to serve. And what you also have to note is that that is the statewide, basically we'll call it the bare minimum rule. If you have a local, if the property is in a jurisdiction that requires more notice than 60 days to terminate a month-to-month tenancy, then you're still going to have to abide by those rules. So some examples, you might look at the city of Seattle, you might look at Tacoma, and you might look at Burien, or Federal Way. They may have, local rules that require, 90 days or 120 days if you're going to terminate a month-to-month tenancy for the reason that you're going to sell the property, for the reason that you're going to occupy the premises. Or you may have just cause ordinances that, might not address that at all. And you have to, look into whether or not the state will gap fill for you. So you can serve notices if it fits into that category. If you are, the second bullet point of the newest moratorium language allows landlords who were already in the process of an eviction, if they had already provided notice previously that they were going to sell the property or personally occupy the premises. So in places like Federal Way, Burien, or Seattle, if you had those minimum requirements, if you were going to do any of those things, if they had already expired, now you can continue your process forward so long as you can show that you did provide that written notice. So that's releasing things a little bit. One of the things that it also does, let's see here, it still protects any sort of unpaid rent or late fees that that came due February 29th or later through the eviction moratorium. You cannot treat basically late fees are out, essentially what it does, but you can't treat that money as something you can claim to credit companies or say is an unpaid amount. You basically have to work with the tenant on a reasonable payment plan up and through the expiration of the current 20-19.2 language. And then after that point, there are procedures put forth that will require you to basically offer a reasonable payment plan to that tenant or that occupant based on their individual situation. And that's kind of the tricky part, is that the moratorium essentially says you can't treat all tenants the same. You can't offer a reasonable payment plan and it be a blanket payment plan. It has to be a conversation with the tenant, and you have to look at their specific and individual needs and address that as what is reasonable. One of the most common questions I'm getting right now from landlords is, well, what is reasonable? And the answer is, I don't know. It's going to depend on the specific judge that may get your case, or the commissioner who may get your case if you have to move forward with an eviction. Some commissioners might be a lot more conservative on that analysis than others. And some may just say, well, sorry, if they have a zero income, then the only thing that's reasonable is a zero payment. I have no idea. I think that the intent of the proclamation is to really get landlords and tenants into a conversation with each other and work together. And I think, Vicki, your comments about how most tenants right now really are, as far as I know, and from my personal and professional experience, they really are working with landlords in many situations. The vast majority of people are working together to solve this problem in a non-contentious way, as non-contentiously as possible. The problem I'm seeing, and Vicki did sort of allude to, is that if you only own 1, 2, or 3 properties, and you even get one tenant who's non-responsive or not willing to negotiate or work with you or pay any amounts at all, that can really be extremely traumatizing as an owner, as an investor, as a landlord. And a couple of my clients are in that situation where they're actually going to lose these homes to foreclosure because the tenants have been, completely non-responsive. And I think at the end of the day, in some situations, I think many people are under the impression that landlords, go after or try to start evicting tenants based on 1 month's unpaid rent. And in my experience as an attorney, that's almost never the case. As a matter of fact, I won't even generally take clients who only you just want to evict somebody based on 1 month's unpaid rent, because they're going to end up spending more money evicting the occupant based on that than they are, going to win. And that's just not useful. So a lot of cases that I have, the landlord had already been in, 4, 5, 6 months of, non-payment or late payment or a combination of both. And by the time COVID came, it has knocked them so far off the mark of being able to catch up, that the property is being forced into foreclosure. So it's kind of like, what's that saying? No good deed goes unpunished. You try to work with your tenant early on and you try to give them as much wiggle room as possible, but it ends up hurting you in the long run because you now are 9, 10 months behind on your mortgage payments, and the mortgage company is going to foreclose on you because maybe you missed a payment before the COVID moratoriums came into being, or you were late on a payment before COVID stepped in and the protections were enacted. So it's not a good scenario for people who don't have lots of properties that are diversified in their investments. And so that's Proclamation 20-19.2. I could spend a day on that. It's very dense. There's a ton in it. And so I'm just going to try to that's basically where we're at. I can answer specific questions if anybody has them. I think that the next level of conversation we've sort of addressed briefly, which is you have your federal moratoriums and regulations, you've got your state moratoriums and regulations, and you also need to look at your city and your local ordinances. Seattle, I think that one's a dead horse, right? There's all sorts of stuff. There's the just cause ordinance regarding month-to-month tenancies. There's the extended late payments. There's the no evictions based on late fees. There's first in time rules, no winter evictions, no criminal background checks and required reinstatements. That's just the tip of the iceberg. So when Vicki was asked, what specific legislation is coming down the pipe that is forcing people to really ask themselves whether or not they can use Seattle or even King County in many ways as a place as a safe investment. This is just what has happened in the last 16 months. And there's more coming. And that's, I think, what investors, or even people who use this as a way to secure their retirement income. I mean, there's all sorts of types of investors, not just large scale ones, but they look at this and they don't necessarily say, I can't handle all of this. The risk is too high. Many of them do. But it's also, well, what else is coming? And it's the unknown, and it's the fact that these changes come down without a whole lot of warning a lot of times, and especially at the city level where you don't have, as much lobbying going on, or really there's just not as much debate about the specific language going into the ordinances. A lot of times ordinances are drafted and approved in meetings, but they don't even have the language really set out yet, and they don't even have the resources within the city or the municipality to support the legislation that they've just passed. So a good example of that would be Burien, I think last year, adopting the just cause ordinances, and they had a requirement that rental properties have a permit. You have to register your rental property within the city limits and go through that process where they check it out. But they didn't have anybody that actually did that job, or that actually had those permits, and they didn't have a permit process. So you had a law that you physically couldn't follow for a time being. And I don't even know if they've fixed that yet. I have no idea, because that's sort of the issue that we're sort of seeing from a landlord's perspective, is like, I know I have all these laws I have to follow. Sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. What do I do? And it's the unknown that I think makes it so that you can't really do a proper risk assessment as an investor. And that can just scare people out of the market, especially people who've been doing it for a while and have been comfortable. Let's see here. No, I think that is, I didn't watch my time. I think I'm probably short, but I'm sure there's going to be so many questions. So I will yield my time to questions. You're
So
muted.
I
Oh, there we go.
me?
Yep. There. Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Okay, awesome. So thank you so much for that. It sounds like you need your own webinar of a few hours of information to put out. And so we'll see what we can do about getting information in front of people. I did have a question. So I've been a landlord in the past, and I probably wasn't following all the rules. I didn't even understand eviction until I had to do it. Is there a place where landlords can go to learn about some of this legislation, about what it is that they need to do? And this is a question, I guess, for anyone, maybe even to you, Vicki, where would someone go as a landlord to learn about this so that they don't find themselves at in a battle without knowing that's what's going to happen?
I think that the Rental Housing Association of Washington is an excellent resource. And some of the resources that they provide are form lease agreements that are based on your specific city sometimes. So if your city has, like Seattle, has many, of its own idiosyncrasies, they have form lease agreements that are for the city of Seattle, which is important. And those lease agreements are reviewed by attorneys that practice the area, and so they are doing their due diligence to make sure that they're as up to date as possible. They also have online webinar classes on specific processes, specific laws, specific rules that you can have access to at any time as a member. Or they have classes, and I've taught I don't know, probably 6 or 7 classes at this point through them, both on the online resource and in person. And those are really useful for landlords, whether you're an experienced landlord and you need to brush up on new laws and new rules, or whether you're a first-time landlord. They're really helpful.
Awesome. Can you share that in the, oh, well, there you go. Never mind.
Yeah, I would definitely support what you said 100%. They've even recently come out with a form for negotiating payment plans with tenants. The Rental Housing Association is invaluable because they do represent the owners of rental property, where some of the other trade associations are representing the managers of such. But I support what Caitlin said 100%.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. So that was really good information, Caitlin. I'm not sure, Rosie, are you saying you have a client for her or a client for Cindy? It kind of came in between the two. So potentially there's a client in there for one of you. And so I'm sure she'll share that information into the chat. Now that we've kind of gone over all of the presenters, is there anyone that wants to maybe have some follow-up time? I don't see any questions right now in the chat. Scott, do you have any on the Facebook view?
No, none yet.
Okay, awesome. That means you guys are doing a great job of explaining, and I have attached your contact information there as well, so you probably will get some follow-up questions there. So again, is there anyone that is particularly on the panel that has anything that they want to touch on? Before I kind of open it up, we have Bill and Michelle Wilmot from the Economic Development Department from the City of Kent. I want to know if they have anything that they'd like to share, but before I open it up to the audience, is there anyone that wants to double back or confirm anything?
I mean, the best I could do is tell you horror stories, like stuff I've been dealing with that I think people don't realize the current moratoriums protect. So I want to explain very carefully that when you read the language of the current proclamations, it is not limited to landlord-tenant relationships. These proclamations cover any person who occupies a dwelling of pretty much any kind, whether there's an agreement for them to occupy that dwelling or not. So a couple examples that I've been dealing with are vacant properties that are either on the market to be sold or have already been sold and just have not closed yet. If somebody breaks into that property and calls it their home, you basically have to deal with the moratoriums before you can remove them. And that is something that really does happen. Yeah. And I've dealt with it, and I'm actually currently still dealing with it. If that person, and I think it's a pretty rare circumstance where a random person does something like that. But if you have a family where the matriarch or the patriarch has passed away, and one of the children is acting as the manager of the estate, and the property has to be sold, and one of the other children or family members doesn't want that house to be sold, that is a situation that I'm dealing with that has caused a lot of frustration and cost a lot of money, because the police, when they're called, if that person calls it their property or their home, the police are instructed under that ordinance not to do anything to disrupt that person's presence, unless, once again, you can prove with a very specific language that they are a significant and immediate threat to the health and safety of others. Only recently has that been extended to the property itself. So even if that person was destroying the property, there was nothing you can do about it. And even now, it will take time for you to deal with it. I think that, understanding the breadth of these rules is really important. I think other cases where the court had already ordered the eviction, the writs were in the hands of the sheriff, it applies. So in this particular circumstance I'm dealing with, this person was evicted based on a 3-day because they had falsely rented out a vacant unit by using Craigslist, and then pretended to be the landlord, and then collected first, last, and the security deposit in cash. And then when my office stepped in to deal with that situation with the tenant who was in there, who wasn't supposed to be there, that my client had no idea who they were, it all came to light. And in this particular circumstance, we, went through the court system to evict the fraudulent individual. The court obviously sided with my client and asked or ordered the sheriff to evict. Sheriff sat on it for 10 days, and then the eviction moratorium came into play. So the person who was in that property was not an immediate and significant threat to another person's safety. They were obviously, a threat to other things, and obviously not what I would consider a stand-up citizen of society, but they weren't violent in any way. And so that person was still there until a week ago. I don't want to get too specific, but they have since been arrested for a violent crime that happened a while ago, and they will probably never get out of prison. Let me just put it that way. However, they had moved in a girlfriend who is now in the property. And that girlfriend, even though my client's never even heard of this person in terms of being a tenant, is covered by the moratorium. So we still have to wait, and my client still has to wait. And so it's worth understanding that the current moratorium language for property owners is really for it could have been landlord tenant limited, but they didn't limit it. They limited it to any person who calls this property a dwelling. You can't get the police to do anything, you can't get the sheriff to do anything, and you can't get the court to do anything. So that is something that, from an investor standpoint, from a property owner standpoint, from a property manager standpoint, has been extremely frustrating. That's
I think one of the biggest things is just for people to know their resources. Because just like Caitlin said, this changes on a daily basis. My head hurts from trying to think about it all the time. So your professional managers, your real estate attorneys, your trade associations, all of the above is what's going to help a potential landlord or a existing landlord through this whole mess. That was editorial comment. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I appreciate it. I don't want to end on that note with this panel, so I want someone to give me a good story of maybe selling a home or getting a good refi, good loan. Someone, Cindy, Rosie, I am sure that while we appreciate Caitlin and Vicki, that the truth is, it is what it is. But just for good measure, let's end with a good story on someone who was able to secure a property.
Well, I had somebody, a good story was that it's an elderly couple, and they were in arrears by 3 months on their mortgage, couldn't make their payment. We got their house sold, but we also put them in that mortgage forbearance, which is not for everybody, as Cindy will tell you. But in this particular case, they're older, they're in their 70s. The mortgage forbearance wasn't going to hurt them. They were going to go into a rental house. So they had relief to be able to have no mortgage payment while I had their house on the market, sold their home successfully with virtual tools, and was able to make them whole again. And they paid off the mortgage forbearance, and they're just pleased as punch that they had these types of tools set out that they could take advantage of and be able to be okay.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. And I see that City of Kent, so Michelle and Michelle and Bill have put something into the chat. Michelle, you want to go off of mute and kind of go over what you shared with us today, or where we should be?
Well, hi, ladies. First of all, thank you so much for all of this very informative, fascinating information. It's helpful to hear, not only for me personally, but certainly professionally, to be able to help answer some questions to some of the folks that we are hearing from. And for things that I don't have answers to, I hope I can call on you all for answers that I might not have right now. I was listening to Caitlin talk about that residential housing inspection program, and that I think it was in Burien, and that they put that in place and they didn't have anybody to manage the program. And I just put a link to ours, and I hope to God that the City of Kent would never put in a program in place and not have anybody to run it, much less not provide any methods of communication and outreach in advance. So anyway, I just put that in there for you all, just to know that we do have a program in place on that front. We require landlords to register for this program and then do these inspections. It was something that many of the folks in our community asked that we have, especially with the diversity in our community. They weren't sure how to make complaints for subpar properties, etc. So we worked with our Cultural Communities Board to put that program in place. I think it's been in place for a little over a year now. Anyway, it's not entirely relevant to this conversation, just sort of. Anyway, I wanted to share that. Bill had to get off of this call to join another one, but I wanted to stay with you all and hear this great information. And since it's all a bunch of really smart gals, I'm just super proud.
Yes. And then Caitlin, if you can share your information so I can get that onto the Facebook page. Thank you so much for sharing today. I don't have any questions in the chat, and I'll just check with Scott to make sure we don't have any on Facebook.
No, no more.
Okay, awesome. All right, so I will give you some time back into your day, but what I would say is that, again, I appreciate South King Media for being here today. I appreciate you wonderful professionals for taking time that I know is very precious to give this useful information to our members and also the community at large. We did record this conversation so it can be found on I Love Kent on the Facebook page. I have taken all of your contact information, put it on the Facebook, and we'll continue to share that, because I think as things begin to change or continue to change on a daily basis, folks hopefully know that the resources out there for you guys to give them the information that they need to be successful, whether they are a landlord or a renter or a buyer or seller, whatever that looks like for them. So again, I just thank you so much for your time. And with that, have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday. Perfect.
Wednesday.
I gotta check. I have to check sometime.
Bye, everyone.
Have a great day. Thank you.
You too.
Bye-bye.